This video is brought to you by Aeroparts.com. In this video, I'm going to be replacing the high pressure power steering line in a 2008 Honda CRV with the K24. This job is pretty straightforward other than just understanding the bleeding procedure to remove the air from the power steering system, which I'll be showing you at the end of the video. Also, there's not any special tools that you'll really need to do this. Simple tools will get the job done. However, there is one special tool that I would recommend, and that is a 21mm crow's foot wrench. And that's to unscrew the power steering line from the rack and pinion. You'll see later on in the video. I'll go more into detail into that later on. High pressure power steering line in a 2008 Honda CRV. And here's where it's leaking from. It's leaking right where the rubber hose is pressed into the metal coupler. Most of them seem to leak from that same spot. You got two 10mm bolts that hold it down right onto the power steering pump. And you can see where that fluid tends to drip down all the way onto everything else down here. The steering bellows, the rack and pinion. Now there's a 10mm bolt here, and you'll be using some needle nose pliers to undo this plastic clip. Now I'm going to move my camera to the left hand side or the driver's side, and here we have the same thing. There's just no clip, just a 10mm bolt that needs to come off. And here's where our power steering line attaches to the rack and pinion. Now I didn't have a 21mm crow's foot wrench to remove that, so I just used a pair of vice grips, and they work just fine. For those that have a lot of rust, however, you may want to consider that 21mm crow's foot, because as soon as you break this loose, it's supposed to spin freely. But if there's enough rust, I've seen these fuse to the metal line, so where as soon as you start unscrewing it, you're really gonna have to turn it a little bit harder to break the line and take it off. And yes, I know it's ideal to not break the old part when you're removing it, just in case there's something wrong with the new part, but sometimes you can't do anything about that. Now I removed this from the top. You'll see in just a moment how I did that, but if you need more leverage, you can jack the vehicle up and remove the driver's side wheel and access it from that side. So if you need to put more muscle into removing this, removing your driver's side wheel and accessing it from that side is going to be your best bet. Now let's put a little bit more light on that and move that camera closer, and then I'm going to back this camera out so you can have a much better understanding of where this is actually located. Now let's start removing that line. You're going to start with the two 10mm bolts, and I actually recommend to have a drain pan underneath this area over here, because I put a rag over here and the rag got completely soaked and oil went right past it and went onto the floor. These bolts are 10mm and they're exactly the same. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop this off and take a look at this piece of rubber here. Look how swollen it is. I don't think it's supposed to be that big. It's very typical of untreated rubber that's exposed to oil for a prolonged period of time. I'm just going to reuse it anyways, but I'm curious, does the one on your Honda CRV look like that? Leave a comment down below, because I wonder if it's actually supposed to be like that. Now disconnecting the power steering pressure switch. I mentioned earlier I would get a better view of this with more light, and here we are. Here's the 10mm that needs to be removed. It's covered in oil, and that plastic is going to be unclipped. Now it's freed up and time to remove the 10mm. Now the 10mm is off and this is freed up, and now time to move to the driver's or left hand side. All freed up, and now time to remove the last bolt. Plug MAF sensor. Now there's two different ways you can access the last 21mm nut on the power steering line. You can remove the driver's side wheel and access it that way, or you can remove the air box. Now the air box is actually very easy to remove. It's just a big old piece of plastic being held on by two 10mm bolts. All you have to do is pop off the air intake hoses, remove the mass airflow sensor, and pop off the air filter. Now the airbox comes off really easy. There's only two 10mm bolts that hold it on. I'm going to show you right now where those two 10mm bolts are located. We have one right here, and the second one is right here. There is a third mounting point, but there's no bolt. You just really pull up on it. That's all you got to do. You can make it easier by applying some grease, maybe a little bit of oil, just to dab on it, just to get it to come off, no problem. All you got to do is tug up on it, and this is exactly how you do it. There is a lower rubber intake hose that I didn't capture on camera here. It comes off just like the top one, but I wanted to at least mention it. There's a whole lot more room to work here. I'm not disconnecting the battery this time. I know I usually say to do it, and I actually would recommend to do it. Take off the negative terminal first and the positive terminal. You put it back on, use the positive terminal, put the negative terminal. For stuff like this, when you're working and maybe your tool is sitting right here, you're gonna get a little bit of a shock. Beware of that. That's when I'm gonna take it off. Just like that. Now once it's removed, we have our entire line freed up and we can go ahead and remove the line. Now I have the sensor here. I'm going to remove it with a 19mm. The new power steering hose came with new O-rings, which we are going to be using the new O-rings. We are going to coat them with some fresh power steering fluid and put them on. Now I'm going to be transferring over the bushings over to the new power steering line. Some kits might come with new bushings, this one didn't, so all we're doing is just reusing the previous bushings and moving them over to the new line. Now the side of the new power steering line that attaches to the power steering pump also is going to get a new O-ring. I don't have any footage of that because the file was corrupted, but I do want to bring it up in the video so we don't forget that part. Now the installation is simply just the reverse process of the removal. There's only a few things that you need to be careful with. I recommend attaching the end of the power steering line first into the rack and pinion, which is what you'll be seeing here. And the other thing is, it's actually very easy to cross thread this type of nut, so be extra careful when you're doing it. If it doesn't feel right when you're screwing it in, back out and start over again. Don't force and try to rush through this type of step. Now the new power steering line was one of the original equipment brands, Gates. It had a 19mm nut, which was perfect. That's a far more common size than a 21. I was able to screw it on very slowly. I got some on footage here, but it was a whole lot easier to put the camera on the tripod and just get to screwing it back on. Now I'm going to be reusing the rubber sleeve because why the heck not? And I'm going to be putting the power steering line in the power steering pump. Two 10mm bolts, we're going to get it right on in, no problem. All this stuff back together. Now the new line is installed and it's time to remove the air from the system. We're going to be bleeding the system here. There's a jack point on the front of the vehicle. It's going to be right here. We're going to lift up the vehicle. We just want the front wheels off of the ground so we could bleed the system. What we're going to be doing is turning the key to the on position, but not starting the engine because we don't want to run the risk of damaging the power steering pump. We're going to turn the steering wheel all the way to the right, and then we're going to start adding fluid. Now once we add fluid to it, we're going to simply turn our steering wheel all the way to the left and all the way to the right from lock to lock. We may have to do it up to 40 times, so take your time here and do not turn the steering wheel too quickly, because if you do it too quickly you will end up pushing the fluid up and out of the reservoir. You're just going to be wasting money here, and that's it. All that's needed from here is to monitor the fluid level and add fluid when necessary. Now it's time to start the vehicle, check for leaks, and then take it for a test drive. If this video helped you out, make sure to give us a like. If you want to see more content on this particular Honda CRV, subscribe to the channel because there's going to be more coming up. And don't forget, if you're looking for high quality aftermarket parts or OE brands, check out eraparts.com.